Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience. For those of you that have been in Davos for a couple days or have been here in the past, you will know that the traffic is really rotten. So, Ambassador Ed, how long did it take for you to get in to Davos?
I'm Foster, so it should have taken 25 minutes. It was an hour and 15. So I apologize. I'm never late.
So for all of those that are tuning in, this candidly is, for me, and I've done over 1,000 interviews in my life, one of the most exciting. These are all my friends. I've invited them together to do something that has never been done before. Before we start talking about politics, global agendas, even supply chain problems, I first want to introduce each of our incredible panelists, starting at the end. Ambassador Ed McMullen, would you tell a little bit about yourself?
Is this on? Yeah. So I was President Trump's ambassador in Switzerland and Liechtenstein for 4 years. I came in 2016, left in 2020. My background is basically in public affairs and private equity. So I've sold my company to become ambassador, so now I'm doing more investments in private equity than public affairs. But I have actually worked with the president closely in this last election. Been down in Mar-a-Lago working aggressively on the transition, working on a lot with the Secretary of State's office and helping staff that office. And just left Washington for the inauguration, so I got in yesterday, and great to be here in Davos. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. John Franchi.
I think I should have brought my resume so I could have passed it over here for you. So John Franchi, I'm from outside of Boston, so if you hear a little accent, that's where it's from, so I apologize. And I was a CIA officer for 29 years. So majority of my career was spent in the Middle East. I was chief in a number of places, and did five war zones as well. So.
Hi, everyone. Michael Sherwin. Longtime DOJ. I started my career in Miami as a prosecutor, doing a lot of cartel work in Venezuela, Mexico, and Colombia. In 2019, I became Attorney General Barr's National Security Advisor. And in 2020 through 2021, I was the U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., which is the largest federal prosecutor's office in the United States. I left after the election.
I have one. Thank you. Chris Voss, stand-up comedian. Boom, boom. All right. Author of Never Split the Difference, former FBI hostage negotiator, coach and train business negotiation these days.
So you know that we have experts, truly masterminds in their field. And I'm very curious to know what Ambassador Ed thinks that it will look like with diplomacy now that President Trump is back in the Oval Office. Talk about diplomacy and how it's going to evolve.
Well, I think the great thing for all of us is that we've had 4 years of Donald Trump as president. And depending on your worldview, it was good or it was bad. I think there should be no surprises. I think the president's positions on issues are very clear. On the side of diplomacy, I can tell you that as his ambassador and having worked closely with him on foreign policy issues and domestic policy issues, there are no surprises. I think we're going to see a very dedicated president to peace and prosperity throughout the world, working aggressively in the United States to pursue that internally and domestically, and then working to try and work toward peace in Ukraine, working toward the Abraham Accords Part 2. We have to look at what we achieved in that first administration, and it truly was historic. To get the Saudis, the Israelis, and most of the Middle East to a table to have a discussion, but then to succeed in those discussions was truly, I think, something worthy of note. And I think Part 2 is going to be a very interesting step in the right direction as well. His team is fantastic. He's got a great foreign policy team. I think on the domestic side, Scott Bessent, who's a very close personal friend of mine, who is the Secretary of the Treasury, absolute professional, spent lots of time in Davos, understands the international and global community and markets. So, and I think if you watched, when Scott was announced as Secretary of the Treasury by the President, you saw an immediate upshoot in the markets. Then when the president was elected, an upshoot. Then when Scott was nominated, another upshoot. And now he's coming through for confirmation on Thursday this week, which looks like it could be another unanimous vote. So he's got the confidence of both parties, which I think is a refreshing part of this next second term of President Trump, an attempt to bring the country together. He's made that clear in his statements. He's made that clear in his victory speech. He made that clear in his inaugural speech. So I think the U.S. has to come together. The division is long over, hopefully. There are those who have Trump derangement syndrome who will never come to reality that he's president. He is for 4 years, and I think hopefully the goal will be to make them understand that they have a major role in this future in the world and future in the U.S. And while we have differences, we have a president who I think is going to be very closely working with diplomats throughout the world for peace and prosperity.
You know, I thought it was fascinating that we saw these tech icons that were supporting him. I mean, truly liked the vision. What was it that was so attractive?
I believe that President Trump's view on the economic front is very different from the previous administration. I mean, I'll be very honest. I'm a partisan. I'm going to satisfy some of you, maybe not others. The last 4 years have been devastating on energy, on the economy. Yes, we had the remnants of COVID that we dealt with. But I think the effects of tax and regulatory and energy policy in the Biden administration had ramifications in the U.S. that were terrible. They are also ramifications, as goes the U.S., so goes the world. And I think we saw that repercussions throughout the world as a result of those policies. The new administration will take a very aggressive approach toward fixing a lot of those problems. We saw amazing success very quickly when President Trump, in the first term, went after deregulation, attempted to try and the tax cuts, which will be reinstated now again, which had a direct effect on really inspiring investment. The real challenge now is the spending side, and that's where Scott Bessent and our team at Treasury and working with Congress, hopefully, we can deal with some of that spending side, because that's the real X factor in the next 4 years.
Thank you.
Can I add a comment to one thing
Please
that
do,
you
Chris.
just said? Because here's what I love about Trump's approach, and a real subtlety, and I was talking about it earlier. His willingness to talk to anybody. Now, most previous American administrations, to come to the table, you got to agree to eventually to become a democracy. Which if you're not, then he says, all right, so you got to agree to lose your job. And the brilliance of the Abraham Accords and why it went through, in my opinion, was the table stakes was just that everybody that comes to the table agrees everybody else that comes to the table gets to keep their job. So as a result of 9/11, I remember, and I was basically I've always been a Republican, was a supporter of President Bush. But then he said, this is our opportunity to bring democracy to the Middle East. And I thought to myself, do you know what they're hearing when you say that? What they're going to hear is you advocate that everybody that you want to cooperate with you has to lose their job. If they're not a democracy, please cooperate with us. And by the way, we're going to replace you. And President Trump has never said that. You know, if you come to the table and you want to cooperate with us, you get to keep your job. And that's a subtle change in American policy that we've never seen before.
Well, that kind of leads me, and that's a good point. So coming from the Middle East, John, as a station chief yourself, how do you see Homeland Security adapting, or global security, or the intelligence community now with a new president?
Well, I think the difference between this president and the previous president is there's going to be certainty, which we've been missing for the last 4 years. And I think that's really important, especially when you're in intelligence or in national security space. And then clarity of mission. That's another part. We haven't been focused as an organization, as an intelligence community, on mission for quite a while. It's gotten distracted by other issues. Not saying any of those issues are not important, although a lot of them being swept to the side by the current administration. But getting back to what the agency does, or the FBI does, or DOD does, or state does, that's going to be the core. I think you're going to see that at the beginning of his term. He's going to start clearing out a lot of people that are kind of in the way, so to speak, who've been mucking up the atmosphere, and then getting back to, okay, you're CIA, your job is to spy. You know, your DOD, your job is you're military, you're FBI. And so I think that's going to resonate really well internationally, because I think a lot of world leaders too have been looking, and they've been confused. And so they've been hedging, and that's what's been going on for the last 4 or 5 years. You start to see traditional U.S. allies saying, "Oh, maybe I need to have closer relationships with the Russians or the Chinese or the Iranians or somebody else because we don't know where this U.S. is going. Is the U.S. going to continue to be a superpower? Does it want to be a superpower?" And I think what's come out of Trump is, yes, it wants to be a superpower. The U.S. is going to forcefully take that role back, and then I think all of the intelligence community and whatnot are going to kind of follow suit.
So you come from law, Michael. Now I'm going to throw this at you. Are there ever any times where, let's say, law must take a backseat to global security or global supply?
I mean, I don't know about a back seat. I mean, if you look at, I mean, this is a broader question. I think that's far afield from what we were just talking about. But, I mean, you could think in a context of like, in the global war on terror, do you suspend constitutional, protections for an exigent national security, functions, for example, in like interrogations or forced interrogations? Do constitutional implications need to be stayed for that? So, from a philosophical perspective, I think that's to answer your question. But staying with the theme with what these gentlemen have been talking about, in terms of what you may see in terms of the law with the new Trump administration, look, I think, as the ambassador said, this administration is going to be very pro-business friendly, so that's going to have direct implications with DOJ, with antitrust in the crypto space. Is it a security? Is it a commodity? I mean, these are huge issues that the last administration was dealing with, and a lot of people kind of felt that the Biden administration, the SEC, was kind of inhibiting the crypto space, and it was kind of inhibiting its growth. I think you're going to see a significant change, and that's why I think you see a lot of, Elon Musk and others on the Trump bandwagon, where there's going to be it's going to be very user-friendly in terms of deregulation in that space. Same thing with antitrust. From TikTok to other social media, there's this perception that, and Trump embraces this, that First Amendment issues, we should enable and foster the First Amendment, whether it's through TikTok or Twitter or social media. We shouldn't inhibit those things. So I think there's going to be some very significant regulatory issues we're going to see in both the social media space and in the crypto space.
So interesting about TikTok, because that has really been taking the world by storm. What are your thoughts on the TikTok situation, Pastor Ed?
Very interesting. I was with, on Saturday night, we had the vice president's dinner in Washington. And on one table was Zuckerberg, the other table was Xu. It was a fascinating interaction of different people. That was the night that TikTok went down and went black. And there was glee in the face of Zuckerberg, okay, until I think the next morning when he woke up and realized, holy hell, the people in the United States have just gone 24 hours or 12 hours without TikTok, and there is a storm like nothing we've seen before. I think that had an effect. I think it has an effect on Congress. I think it has an effect on any politician who has to look and say, is it the proper role of government to be taking a private company, messing with it to the point that they did with TikTok, and then throw the results out there and let it be what may? I think the president came through with his executive order giving great clarity to the proper role of government. Analyze it for the next 2 months, figure out the proper role of national security to ensure that that TikTok is not being used in a way that has any negative effect on U.S. national security. That is the role of government. It is not the role of government to pick and choose losers in the market. And I think the president is a refreshing breath of fresh air to finally draw a red line and say, here's where we are, here's where we're going. We don't have to sit and wonder, like we did for the last 4 years, where are we going? How are we getting there? So I think TikTok is in a very good position right now in that they have to give clarity to where they are. And I think Xu has done a great job of doing that. He is an honest player. He is a Singaporean who is devoted with family in America, I think they're American citizens, to ensuring the transparency that's necessary. If he does that, I think TikTok will thrive.
That's a great response. So Johnny, I got to come to you in terms of the intelligence community, these social media platforms. How big of a threat can they be, in the wrong hands?
Well, they can be. I look at this a little bit differently. So I agree with the ambassador. You need to look at it. Is it a threat? Is there a way that a country or some entity can use a social media platform as a threat, as an active threat? But I also view it as, look, I'm a parent. Like, my job is to I should know what my kids are doing, right? So it's not the government's job to police my kids as to what they're doing online. I think we have given up that. We've like, social media has basically become television, like, for my generation. Put the kid in front of the TV, that's a babysit, and then he's quiet. Oh, that's great, right? And then we can go off and do our own thing. I mean, everyone's smiling because, yeah, we've probably all done it. I do, and I do it sometimes too. To me, you can't transfer that accountability. Or if you're willing to transfer that accountability, then you're going to end up with the results that you've ended up with now. So I think this is a call that parents, like society as general, we should step up and start taking a more active role in this and watching what our children watch, watching what our partners are involved in, all of those kinds of things, as opposed to government.
And it is very important. I learned this last night because I did not know this. TikTok has an option on there for parents. If your child has that on his, my children are now 30 years old. And I'm not watching their media. I'm trying, but it won't work. But you know, there's an option there for parents to go in, click it off. If they don't want them to have it, they don't have it. Parents have to play a role here. Nanny government is over in the United States. It's the role of parents and individuals to decide what's best for them.
So shifting gears, probably to a topic that might be a bit sensitive, but you brought it up in the beginning, Ambassador. Tucker Carlson had an opportunity to interview President Putin. Some of the questions I thought were good, others I thought probably weren't the best. It's always been a personal dream of mine to interview the president. Mr. Negotiator, Chris Voss, you're given an opportunity, 5 minutes, to sit down with President Putin. What would you ask him?
Only 5 minutes, huh? Okay. I believe in the phrase "vision drives decision," and then you pick a point in the future where both of you agree on a vision. Like, if I get somebody barricaded in a bank, what I'm going to say to him is, "You want to live." All right, so he agrees he can live. I agree he can live. Now let's work our way back from here. So my question would be, potentially, and I'm thinking this through, how do we get Russia to thrive without military conflict? How do you feed your people? How do you provide a better future for the Russians without destroying your neighbors? Now, his answer is not going to matter. The point of the question of how to do it is to make him think about it and potentially plant seeds for the future, where there's a future where everybody prospers, but you don't got to attack. You don't need a humanitarian crisis. Wars, not just a humanitarian crisis, it's an environmental crisis at all. Also, how expensive is it to bomb Gaza and bomb Gaza into the Stone Age? Who's going to clean that up? How much is that going to cost? So similarly, you know, how do you create a future where you thrive, but not at the expense of your neighbors? So I'm going to ask him a question that ideally creates a different future in his head, or at least makes him think about prosperity in another way.
So I'm going to jump to you, Michael, and I'll put this in your head regarding how businesses globally are impacted, or individuals that are impacted on both sides of this conflict. But first, I want to know the administration's position on the current conflict in Ukraine.
Well, I think the president spoke very clearly throughout the campaign. Ironically, one of the things that very few people realize is in the first term of President Trump, his intelligence team, Robert O'Brien, National Security Advisor, and others, worked aggressively at the end of the term for a peace that would be longstanding between Ukraine and Russia, directly with Putin, directly with Zelensky. They made amazing headway. And then President Trump lost the election. At that point, had we had a second Trump administration, I'm convinced we never would have seen this war revolve. Because they had agreements. They had agreements that hostilities between the two countries needed to be resolved. They were making headway there. Our team briefed the incoming team. The professionals were very interested to see the progress that had been made, but the political side kicked in and said, no, that's a Trump idea. That's a Trump movement. We're going to do our own thing. Flash forward, look where we are today. That was their own thing. Millions dead, billions in dollars, and devastation throughout the economy, throughout Europe and the US. So the president's dedicated to finding a way to getting those two back to the table, Zelensky, Putin at the table, finally figuring out how we're going to move forward. I have great confidence that President Trump will do this. He has the willingness to work with people others haven't. He has had a relationship with Putin. He's had a relationship with Zelensky. And I hope, as we all know, in diplomacy and in negotiations, if both sides are unhappy, you've got to win, okay? And so both sides will not be happy with the conclusion, but we will see peace, we will see prosperity, and we will see the movement toward freedom and liberty throughout the world, and the security of sovereign nations like Ukraine.
Thank you so much. Now moving over to law. Michael, for some of us, we may not see what is happening behind the scenes, how businesses are being impacted, how individuals are being impacted. And there is some guilt by association if someone had, I will tell you, being a media guy, about a year ago, a good friend of mine called me up. And somebody had written a hit piece about him because he was seen in a photo with President Putin years earlier at an event. And then people stopped doing business with him because he was seen in a photo with somebody. Talk about the law aspect, because you're dealing with clients around the globe that are being impacted by this as an attorney. Talk about the law aspect.
I think the greatest impact in which people are looking at the law in terms of this war is probably with sanctions. And remember, sanctions are an executive action. It's not legal or judicial. That it's an executive action through OFAC or Treasury or the EU authorities or the UK authorities based upon information to freeze assets, whether it's a yacht in Dubai, whether it's a bank account in Turkey or a bank account in Burbank, California. So you've seen an evolution of sanctions. Sanctions, when I worked in DOJ, sanctions were very surgical via Venezuela, IRGC, Iranian crude, high technology, dual-use materials to North Korea to, hinder nuclear technologies. They were very surgical, and those sanctions packages were very elaborate, a fusion of intelligence, law enforcement, and open source information. Sanctions became very weaponized during the Ukrainian conflict, where business opponents were feeding information, disinformation, open source information to the EU and UK authorities to sanction business competitors. And now there are thousands, the Ukrainians have thousands of people on the sanctions list. Now some are legitimate individuals that should be sanctioned that are feeding the Russian war machine, but there are also a lot of people caught in the crossfire. Maybe it's, there could be grandkids of people that haven't been in Russia in 30 years that are being sanctioned in the United States because it's very weaponized. So that's having a real world impact on businesses around the world. Or if a German company wants to buy a branch of a Russian bank that wants to return their assets back to the European account holders, they can't do that because OFAC isn't giving a comfort letter. So I think you are going to see the shrinking of sanctions over the next several years. You're going to see it become more surgical, at least from the U.S. perspective. I think it's going to be very hard to undo the EU and UK sanctions. That could take years. And I think what you're going to see now is because of rebuilding Ukraine, you're going to see, remember, sanctions is an executive action. Now you're going to see a judicial action to seize, not only seize, but freeze, but seize those assets, billions, to rebuild Ukraine. So I think there's going to be, legions of litigation in the EU and the UK because that's a violation of due process. There was, seizing these billions of dollars of assets from people without due process where they couldn't challenge the sanctions. So that's going to be, I think, a very significant, we're going to see many significant actions, I think, over the next 12 to 18 months on that front and from a legal perspective.
Thank you very much. Now moving over to you, Chris Voss. Has anybody ever met that person that gives us advice on something and they've never sold lemonade before? My uncle had a saying for it. He's a doctor, and he said, the suits would come in and tell me what to do and how to do it, yet they had never been a doctor themselves. You're a professional negotiator. Some of those who've been appointed by the administration, while they have excelled in certain areas, they have never been a diplomat to the level you have. So Chris, what are they going to be facing as they are going across the world, spreading this mission, let's say the voice of a nation? What are they going to be experiencing, and what on the other side should they be talking to them in terms of some sort of a give and take approach?
Well, they're going to first experience the residue of the people that held the chairs in front of them. And if there was a confused administration, which it was in many ways, and people didn't know exactly what they wanted because there were so many competing interests, our counterparts globally are going to sit back and wait to see whether or not they can, first of all, count on what the Americans are going to say, or is it going to change every 4 to 5 weeks, or how often it might change? And so they're going to look for stability first. And as soon as they start seeing stability and they're comfortable with that, then even if you disagree, if you know what you're going to disagree on, that provides stability and reassurance and trust. And now you know you have a target you have to hit. So our counterparts are going to sit back. Fortunately, previously, Donald Trump, he doesn't really surprise anybody. People say he's
Shaking your head, Mr. Ambassador.
unpredictable. He says what he means. Nobody's surprised. Can you believe that he doubled down on what he said? Yeah, he says what he means. So that amount of stability for the counterparts is going to be very reassuring. And then for the people that are in the new area, anybody that's open to hearing what the other side says, that automatically makes you a better negotiator, because the other side wants to be heard, and they want to agree once they've been heard. So the people that are new at it, whether or not they've had, you got a special forces colonel that's being asked to negotiate for the first time, and with no experience. I mean, the case I talked about 2 days ago was effectively a special forces colonel, but he was open to learning, and he was smart, and he wasn't set in his ways, and he wanted to hear what other people had to say. So as long as they're open to hearing what the other side says, then that'll overcome if there's any deficiencies in their experience in negotiation per se. They want to pontificate, as many ineffective politicians do, then they won't get far. But if they're willing to hear the other side out, they'll do really well.
Thank you very much. Now, as we go towards the last 5 minutes of this panel, I want to move to global supply chain, as well as current threats to supply chain. Is there, Mr. Ambassador, a current global imbalance in terms of the trade side?
So I think, I call this tariff terror, clickbait tariff terror, right? I mean, nothing sells papers like the fear of tariffs, right? The great thing, and you just mentioned this, great point, he is very predictable. We had 4 years of Donald Trump. There is nothing that's going to be markedly different from those 4 years. He will be aggressive, and on trade, he's been extremely aggressive, and he's given clarity through his actions on what you can expect. As ambassador in Switzerland, I witnessed the fear, and it's a legitimate fear. There's a lot of business that's impacted by tariffs. But for those countries that are operating in free trade in a fair and reciprocal way, there should be no fear. For Switzerland, huge investment in the United States, huge jobs. There's clarity, there's reciprocity. And that is the key word that matters to Donald Trump. And frankly, to most economists, and frankly, to most Americans. Is there a reciprocity of trade? And if there is, and certain barriers are not given to our markets and the markets of other countries, you're in great shape. If you're not, watch out, because you are the target, and you're not going to be trading in the United States of America with unilateral trade and non-reciprocity. It's a very simple, very predictable reality. So the tariff terror just needs to calm down a little bit, look at what we saw in the first 4 years. That's where we're going, and that's what we'll see.
Now, moving over to you, and thank you so much for that, sir. Moving over to you, John, in terms of the intelligence community. Now that we have this shift and this change, what are they going to face in terms of the supply chain? Are there going to be people that are going to try to mess this up?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and it's a lot of the people that are going to be losing out on the readjustment as to how things have been moving for the last 4 years or more. And I think the consistency, what this president's going to bring is a consistency that we haven't seen as well. One of the things as Americans, I point this out a lot of time, is we're really bad at remembering history. We're really bad at remembering what happened before. And the world remembers everything, right? So we'll remember the promises that we've made in the Middle East or in different countries, and then when it comes time to actually follow through on them, we do it for a little while, and then we get distracted. You know, Johnny Depp, maybe he's getting divorced, so we're going to focus on that, right? Or we get distracted easily, and then we move on to something else. And I think that's one of the things we're not going to have in this case, which is a president who's laser focused on, and an administration that's laser focused on what the goals are. And it'll be a consistency that I think that'll unnerve a lot of folks, but it'll also give comfort to a lot of others who are in a very good place.
And final thoughts from you, Michael, on the law aspect of this on the supply side. Do you think it's going to be easier to deal with this administration than prior administration?
Yeah, I think, again, just saying, parroting what the ambassador said, I think you're going to see, like I opined earlier, everything from antitrust regulations, that have direct implications to regulatory implications in the crypto space. That's going to have a direct impact upon supply chain, issues. So absolutely there'll be a change.
Thank you so much to our panelists. We have room for 4 questions. I know that the Dean of the University, Chapman University, Dean Henrik, I know that you had a question for our panelists. I know we also had a question from Mark Kohler. Jessica had a question, and we had room for one more. Tim Johnson, I know you have a question as well for our panel. So I'm going to start with you, Dean Henrik, Chapman University. You take the mic. I'm going to give it to you.
I agree with the ambassador that I think we have a lot of predictability with Trump coming in. It's sort of unusual that you have a president that is coming in a second term, with someone else in between. But what do you think? We turn to the other side of it, uncertainty and risk factors. Which ones are the ones that you think business leaders they should pay most attention to?
I personally think, as a businessman, the thing that is the most difficult thing is how do you do business? What is the reality of the market, right? And I think the market has fluctuated so much, and we've had such a devastating effect on unpredictability, that the predictability that will come, and I've got to tell you, the shining star, y'all, to focus on here is Scott Bessent, the new Secretary of the Treasury. This is one of the brightest, sharpest men, women, anyone who's served in that capacity. He has an understanding of macro and microeconomics like no one who's ever served in this capacity, maybe since Alexander Hamilton in the 1700s. He's going to be a huge impact on the president. He's helped the president emerge in his view of the economy and how to repair it in a way no one has had that kind of impact for the last year he's worked with him. I do think that the spending side is the great challenge, right? How do we get that under control, and what does that look like? And I think it's always been a challenge in the United States because everybody's sitting around dependent on the social welfare state we've created. Making sure that those who need it most, the president's committed to ensuring they have that. But those who aren't in the greatest of need, there's going to be some serious realignment. And I think that's going to be one of the more unpredictable questions as to how that spending side emerges.
Thank you so much. Mark Kohler, Main Street Tax Pro.
For Mr. Sherwin, my fellow attorney up here, Department of Justice. Wow. What is lots of changes to happen there. How do you expect the transition to be? Is it going to be smooth, or what are some of the changes you expect to see after being on the inside and the dramatic changes that need to be taken with lawfare and those sorts of conversations?
I mean, I think first also, Attorney General, or nominated Bondi will get through easily, obviously. So I think you will see a shift in priorities, through the antitrust division, civil, and even in criminal prosecutions. Look, the great bulk of 98% of all the criminal division will stay the same, focusing on violent crime, human trafficking, counterterrorism. I think you will see, though, a change with the FBI, with Kash Patel, who I think will also get nominated easily. There was, over the past several decades, and John could even talk to this, I think the FBI wanted to almost become the CIA. A lot of field agents wanted to do the, secret squirrel stuff overseas.
You were hurting my feelings. I don't know.
But this was after you left. This was after you left. The past 20 years. So I think you're going to see, I think the new FBI director is going to recalibrate a lot of agents going back to the field and flooding a lot of, I think there's only one international narcotics squad out of Miami. There used to be 24. I think you're going to see a lot of focus now with the Bureau focusing on of the cartel problem, weapons trafficking, especially with the border, working closely with immigration and human trafficking, something that the Bureau has gotten away from, I think, and DOJ over the past decade. So there is going to be a shifting of priorities.
Okay, could I comment on that? Because I think That's a great question, number one, because it had a huge effect on the American people in the last 4 years. To watch the lawfare, to see trained prosecutors who are supposed to have the scale of justice in their hands intentionally go out and use those offices for political purposes, indicting the president, ironically, in the most Democrat cities and the most Democrat prosecutors in the country, using it for political purposes. That has got to be the number one goal of the Justice Department, to restore that confidence in if without a justice system, we are a banana republic. And I think we have to fix it. And I think I'm the only person here who's probably managed a CIA and an FBI office out of the embassy in Bern. And I got to tell you, the people who work in those offices, they are on the front lines. They are dedicated soldiers for liberty and freedom. And they are happy today because their leadership has been devastating the credibility of the two agencies. We are going to restore those two agencies back to the confidence the American people need to have in them.
Thank you so much. I'm going to move to Tim Johnson. Tim, Health and Tech, thank you so much for your partnership here. Question?
Yeah, not sure who to direct it to. I'd love to spend time with all of you on it, but for those of us who do business with China, we didn't talk anything about that. It was very good when Trump came in out of the gate. It opened up, the capitalism there started coming through. What do you see as the change now between then and now, if any, and what direction is it going?
I'll take it.
Mr. Ambassador.
I think, you know, in the first 4 years of Trump, you saw the president entertain Chairman Xi down in Mar-a-Lago in an attempt to try and forge a relationship between the two greatest superpowers in the world. This is the kind of, I think, foreign policy you can expect President Trump to continue to pursue. The idea that escalating things to the point where war is on the brink is untenable in his mind. We're in the 21st century. That's devastation for the world. It is not a game to play with. And the idea of using the State Department to return cables back and forth for the next 10 years to get to resolution on something is not in his mind. So yeah, he will pick up the phone. He will talk to Xi. He will talk to Putin. He will talk to the leaders of the world and find a way to solutions. It's unorthodox. Does the media like it? No. Do the State Department bureaucrats? No. But it has gotten us progress before. I think it will get us progress again. You cannot deny that China is a major superpower. We have to address the reality in the room. On trade, if they play ball with reciprocity and fairness, on intellectual property, fairness and security, I think we've hit two major key problems that we can move on to the next realities of opportunities for both countries to trade fairly, freely, and prosperously.
Well, but we're also going to be acting, we've been a reluctant superpower for a number of years. And I think what you're going to see is that's gone. And so the discussions are going to be more even, or in some sense, we're going to start flexing our muscles as to where they really are, as opposed to just letting things happen and just kind of being reluctant, being embarrassed to be the strongest country, the biggest, wherever we are.
So we have time for two more questions. Jessica's going to be first, then Austin from Doxy, one of the leading AI advisory companies in the United States, to talk about Stargate. So first, Jessica, my very dear friend of mine.
First thing, I just want to say thank you to Dustin, connect all the good people in this panel. And first thing I would say, represent my country, Indonesia, to say thank you so much to our Excellency Edward. I mean, in Indonesia, we heard your good name, and especially our good friend, Minister Investment Rosan. I mean, in here, everybody say, you make the Europe is like amazing. And can I ask him the question? Yes. Because now this world is in the frustrating situation because we have a war ongoing in the Europe and also in Middle East. And as an ambassador, do you have, any advice to everyone to calm down everyone? I mean, do you think this world will go to the better under the Donald Trump?
It's a beautiful question. Beautiful question.
It is, and thank you for the comments. I went to Israel about a year and a half ago, right after the October 7th devastation. I saw firsthand what Hamas did in Gaza. And, well, in Gaza, they've destroyed Gaza. And then in Israel, over the border, I saw what they did to the people. We're now seeing the results of released prisoners who've been starved for a year, beaten, and treated like animals. This is not civilized society we're dealing with. And so it's a very difficult challenge as to how we deal with it. I think the president is dedicated to bringing Middle Eastern nations together, the critical areas, Saudis, the UAE, the Omanis, the whole team together to try and find a way to work with Israel to resolve the problems in Gaza and find a way to get Hamas, Hezbollah, and other serious terrorist problems to be not the credible problem they are today. That's the dedication I know we will have in the Middle East. Abraham Accords Part 2 will be a critical part of that. I think, again, I said in Ukraine and Russia, that's the president's, he ran on it as solving the problem quickly and moving on to allow freedom, prosperity, and democracy to thrive. And I hope that we can get to that point. I have great confidence, knowing this president personally. This is not something he does for a political purpose. He feels it in his heart. He knows that he has children and grandchildren that are impacted by these decisions. And he is genuinely focused 24/7 on these issues. And I think we'll see great results.
So I want to add now, Donald Trump in China is became like a role model because he's such a good father, he's a good grandfather, and now everybody look at America is the one thing. With his busy schedule, he keeps spend the time for the grandchildren, and everybody adore him. Then thank you so much, Excellency.
Thank you so much,
Have a
Jessica.
good day.
Thank you. Our final question goes to Austin Ambrosi, co-founder of Doxy, proud partner of Davos Lodge. You are a leading advisor, your company in the AI space based in Colorado. You had a question for this group.
Yeah, so I think I think AI is much more in the public sphere of awareness now than it was at the beginning of the last presidential term. And with all the investments that are moving in that direction, as mentioned by Project Stargate, things of that nature, and with the new Department of Government Efficiency and whatnot, it's like on the one hand, AI is beginning to assume the role of a lot of different positions. And people are happy about that, enthused to let it go and see what it can do. On the other hand, people are nervous about not letting the genie out of the bottle, so to speak. I'm curious, with all the experience on stage right now, as it pertains to the government, the judicial system, things like that. To what extent do you think that President Trump and the United States government is going to incorporate AI into the government in the coming term?
I mean, I'm no AI expert, so I don't know what the current administration's policy is on AI, so I'm not going to speak out of turn here. Ambassador, I don't know if you...
I can speak to this. I spent a lot of time at Mar-a-Lago with Elon and some of the other tech whizzes that have recently had an epiphany. And it's wonderful to see because it's really critically important. You and I discussed this before, actually. Very important that this progress, this new technology is not a partisan technology. It should be no partisan or politics in it. It's what is best for the world. And AI, anyone who is realistic and looking at the future knows it'll play a critical component in so many technologies and moving and advancing the world forward. The president's committed to that. I think you could never have seen it better than at his inauguration when you saw the people standing behind him that were Bezos, Zuckerberg, the whole the whole team of people in the world that he has a lot of disagreements with, but he understands the critical nature of the technology and the future, and he's dedicated to bringing them into the table and making them a part of that discussion. So, optimism.
Yeah, my short, humans can't be replaced. I'm a complete believer in that. Now, my own personal experience, we're using AI to augment some of our own material. And so I had somebody pull something together for me. My idea is AI. I'm writing this piece. And when I read what AI had put in front of me, I came up with an idea that I'd never had before. And I think that's where it takes us. I think if you don't want to work hard and you don't want to be original and you don't want to create new things, then you should be afraid of AI because it's gonna replace you. But if you're ambitious, and there's a difference between being ambitious and competitive. If you're ambitious, you want new things, you want to create new ideas. And I loved when I read that somebody put together a summary for me, better than the average co-writer ever did. And then I'm reading it, and a new idea occurred to me. And that's why I think humans will never be replaced.
So that is the end of this panel. I would like to thank Irene Van Teraki, founder of Davos Lodge, for allowing us the opportunity for my friends and I to come together. And I'd like to also thank our partners, Health and Tech, Doxy, as well as Main Street for supporting this. Thank you, everybody here in the room, and thank you to everybody out there as well. That's a wrap.